When we started, many of us thought about the school as really primary beneficiaries would be the students, but it's so much bigger and wider than that, Ben. It's the families. It's the whole community that you're lifting up because this structure becomes a center point in the whole community. And if you build that kind of support for the kids, then the parents can make better decisions.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Identity Architects, the InfoSum podcast that spotlights the leaders in the media industry shaping the future of advertising. I'm your host Ben Cicchetti, and this week I had the opportunity to sit down with Jay Sears, founder of Team Dayā and a man who has been there and done that in the media industry. Chatting with Jay was incredibly inspiring, and I can't wait for you all to hear about his journey and the amazing work he's leading at Team Dayā. Before we jump into that conversation, this is your reminder to hit that subscribe button so you'll be alerted when new episodes of Identity Architects land. But without any further delay, here's my chat with Jay. As long-time listeners will know, at the end of each podcast, we ask for a future nomination from our Identity Architects. And when I spoke to Shiv Gupta at the start of the year, he nominated today's guest to be on the podcast, Jay Sears, founder of Team Dayā. Jay, welcome to the podcast.
Ben, thanks for having us, and we're so glad that Shiv Gupta put in a good word for us at Team Dayā.
Yeah, for sure. He's a big champion, and it was a fantastic episode, and I'm super excited for this episode as well. For anyone who may be unfamiliar with you, can you just give us a quick overview of yourself, but also of Team Dayā, as I know we're going to get into much more detail on the incredible organization a little bit later on.
Sure. So I'm a long-time advertising and technology executive. I tell people I'm the veteran of two IPOs, one merger and acquisition, and one failure so spectacular they wrote a book about it. But in a kind of second chapter, got together with some other executives in the business in 2018 and started Team Dayā. Daya is a Nepalese word for kindness. And what we do, it's all volunteer, and we raise money primarily from people in the industry. We have over 1,000 donors to Team Dayā, and that money funds the construction of primary schools. So these are schools that typically serve pre-K through 6th or 8th grade in the developing world. And these are in very remote communities and in areas that suffer from very high rates of poverty and illiteracy. So the idea is you build a school, and we talk about building change. It's just really big generational impact for what we're able to do.
Sounds incredible, and I'm super interested to not only dig in Team Dayā, but you've had a fascinating career, so I'm really interested to hear about that journey as well. But we'll start the way we always do, which is with a series of quick-fire questions, which is to get to know you a little bit better. Starting with what your earliest memory of advertising is.
Yeah, so I have two that I think of a lot. So one is a Coca-Cola commercial in the late 70s with Mean Joe Green. He was a football player, and it was in the kind of entry tunnel to the field, and the little boy hands him a cold Coca-Cola after a tough game, and the kid gets the Mean Joe Green's jersey in response, and he said, hey kid, catch. And he threw him the jersey, and it was just a really nice reminder that advertising, to be really effective, needs to carry a level of emotion, and that certainly had it. And the other one that I think about is advertising as culture, and I think the best example that I always think of there is just the whole phenomena of MTV, and how music videos, which really were advertising in their own right, became the content that then advertising was sold against. So, a good example of advertising as culture And it's real cultural currency.
If you take yourself back to that, that Coca-Cola commercial when you were younger and put yourself back into that mindset, what did you want to be when you were younger, when you were growing up?
Gosh, a number of phases, but I would say journalist, foreign service officer, public policy. Those would be some of them.
Amazing. That's super interesting. So what was it? What was your first job then in either advertising or marketing?
The first job was at a New York City PR firm that back then you got your job out of the back of the newspaper classifieds. And it was a kind of a feast or famine kind of boiler room type situation. The guy who hired me was let go 3 months into my new job. So I was really in the deep end, but I loved it. And, you learn a lot in that situation, too. So it ended up being a great learning experience for me.
Yeah, I bet. Kind of a bit of a sink or swim kind of moment when those things
Absolutely,
happen.
absolutely.
What do you think it was about the advertising industry that drew you in, and kind of what keeps you excited about it and involved in it to this day?
Well, simply, I think it's the storytelling aspect of it. One of my philosophies about life is you better have great stories. If you don't have great stories, you got to reassess. Mm. And so I think storytelling, the art of storytelling, all the ways you can do that, all the aspects of doing that, and then kind of across that, understanding influence and what that means and what that means to culture and society and how we all behave, and of course my own turn, which very quickly went into different internet businesses, was when I first saw the internet in the 90s. And gosh, I can't tell you exactly why, Ben, but as soon as I saw the internet and I understood what it was, I was just I immediately knew it was going to change everything. Change how we communicate, change how we market, change how we sell. And at that point, I was just a few years into work, and it worked out nicely. But I would have worked for anybody that knew anything about the internet, and I went looking for them, and on from there.
It's so true. We don't necessarily take it in that the introduction of the internet was probably the single biggest change to our lives as we look at it now that's ever happened, right? And that moment of change. And I remember the first time we got internet at our house, and kind of that excitement of being able to access all that information for free, seemingly. It's just an incredible moment. And I love your philosophy of you've got to have stories to tell, and if you haven't got stories to tell, you've got to reassess things. I think that's it's a great way to live your life, actually, is just kind of building stories and having stories.
Yeah.
You must get to speak to a lot of people at different points in their career, coming into the advertising industry. So what advice would you give to someone who is maybe just starting in their career in either media or advertising?
Well, I'd always tell people to work for the person, not the company. When you surround yourself with good people, whether that's peers or managers or what have you, makes a huge difference. And most of us have had a mix of that experience, and there's a lot of good fortune when you surround yourself with good people. And then the other three things I would say is, kiss a lot of frogs. It's hard to find your prince or princess and put numbers on your side, and you do that by kissing a lot of frogs. And that's hard. It's hard work because it's people saying no. It's knowing that you're going to fail a lot. The second one is, I would say yes, way more than you say no. when you're presented with opportunity, and be there, be in the room, be present. And then the other thing is get three, meaning when you're networking, if I go see you, someone's introduced me to you, and I'm trying to network to now understand what you do, and maybe have you introduce me to other people. If I'm in a meeting with you, my rule is I'm not leaving that meeting until I get three names and phone numbers. And you say this to people, and they're like, "Well, what do you mean?" I said, "Don't leave." "Well, what do you mean?" "I'm just going to ask and they'll send it." Nope. Don't leave. Don't leave the video call. Don't leave the phone call. Don't leave the person's office. And you can do it in a lovely way. And if you do that, it just reaps dividends.
I mean, that's some really, really strong advice. I really hope people who, we're in a fantastic industry, and I hope people that are coming into this industry get to listen to that. But I think that advice carries across any industry, really. And for anyone who's just starting out in their professional career, I think that's really strong advice. A two-part question, really. What keeps you awake at night, and what gets you up and motivated in the morning?
Well, I mean, maybe the same thing, and beyond family and friends, which I would prioritize. These days it's Team Daya and what we're doing as far as building change, and all the aspects of that I know we're gonna get into, but the core thought process around that is, and this always applied to my professional career as well, is how do you empower the people around you? So yeah, I have my own list of tasks and objectives, but part of that is thinking about who are the people around you that support what you're trying to do, right? And have you removed all the roadblocks for those folks? And have you given them all the tools that they need to get their job? Because that ends up being your superpower. I mean, we can each kind of do these things individually, and that's really important. And you have to be disciplined in your own work. But it's also, hey, what are these leverage points? And these leverage points are all the people that you surround yourself with. So, to really do my best to try to be aware of who those people are, and whenever I can, help empower them to make that a priority.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good mentality to have. We obviously are involved in a very complex industry, and it's ever changing. It's why things like You Have Digital that Shiv Gupta is from existed to help us educate on what we do as an industry. But it is very complex. So how would you describe what you do within the media and advertising industry to, say, a 10-year-old?
Yeah, I love this question. So I would first ask the 10-year-old about their favorite books. And I might get responses like Where the Wild Things Are, or Goodnight Moon, or The Giving Tree. And then we'd talk for a minute about how they're all great stories. And I'd say, well, advertising is about telling great stories and using stories to help people and organizations sell things. And those things could be products or services or aspirations, ideas, policies, but that the core of it is telling really good stories.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's fantastic. I think that's a really strong answer. The last of our quickfire questions, and it's a personal favorite of mine because it always gives me a little bit of a unique insight into everybody that I get the opportunity to speak to on this podcast. If there was a song that was a soundtrack to your life, what would it be?
Yeah, it would be a Art Garfunkel song called A Heart in New York. He released it the same year he did the outdoor concert in Central Park with Paul Simon. And it's just a song about New York City. And for me, I grew up in New York City. I live in the suburbs of New York City now. And I just see New York as a metaphor for so many things. Success, failure, strength, inspiration, starting, serendipity, and it also has formed really a core belief of mine that strength comes from diversity. And you just get that in spades, in New York. And I think it just gets so overlooked. So, yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah, that's a fantastic choice. We have a playlist on Spotify that we add all these songs to, so that
Oh my
will get
gosh.
added
Okay. All right.
for everyone to enjoy. And I'm not sure, as you said that, I sat here and think I can't think of another city that has had more songs written about it than New York, which is quite interesting. So clearly an incredibly inspirational city. And so many songs kind of written about it. That's a great choice.
Yeah, and we're talking a lot about stories. It really is a city full of stories, And like I said, I think in many ways the best stories come from its diversity and the people that come to New York, and from someone who really was born and bred there. I've always really been aware that the lifeblood of it is people that roll the dice and take the shot to come to New York, and whether they stay or whether they pass through or whether they're there for just a certain period of their life, like that's the unique energy that is New York, and I think it's a lesson that we can try to replicate in a lot of other things in life. Whether it's the relationships that we maintain, or the companies that we help run, or our efforts like a Team Daya that we're all doing to kind of make the world a little better place.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a great mentality
Yeah.
to take. We've talked a lot about stories already, and I'm interested to dig into your story a little bit as we dive into some of the more topic related questions. You've had an impressive track record in our industry with an incredible portfolio of companies that you've worked at. Can you just give us a quick tour of your career path to date?
Yeah, so I would go back to the 90s when I was mentioning a minute ago that I got on the internet and just decided that I thought it was going to change things a little bit. And then I went on a wild search and was talking to anybody that knew what this thing was, and who had a point of view. That's another thing. You got to have a point of view. I always say it can even be wrong, but it doesn't matter. Like if you don't have a point of view, you get less engagement from people around you. So I looked for people like that, and so one of the guys I found was a guy by the name of Michael Wolff, who's a media columnist and author, and he wrote a number of the Trump books. And anyway, he had a small desktop publishing business in the mid 90s, and he had published a printed directory. It wasn't the Internet Yellow Pages. It was something similar. It was called Net Guide, and literally was a printed book. It was sold in bookstores, and it would list some of the websites that you might want to visit because no one knew what they were. It had all the early websites. The one that monitored the Coke machine at Carnegie Mellon University, and all the other kind of basic, most early websites. And he said, "Hey, this thing's taken off, and I think we could do more desktop publishing, but the real vision is to raise some money and do what was an early internet directory. Something very similar to if the listeners remember the very earliest version of Yahoo, when Yahoo was really in its heyday, was a directory. It's like we didn't know where to go. And we said, oh, I'd really like a personal finance site or a site with movie reviews. And we'd all go to Yahoo, and that's where we started. So, and that was the big failure that they wrote, that Michael ended up writing a book about called Burn Rate. But it was a real, lesson in the internet business. It got me thinking about advertising, content, and really kind of got me off to the races. And met a lot of the early internet people in that context. That I kept on with over the years. Um, and just a spectacular. I mean, there's so many. We could do a whole show just on that one experience and all the stories. But I went from there to a company called Edgar Online, which was the company that commercialized the U.S. Security and Exchange Commission disclosure database. So these are quarterly and annual reports, things that move markets. But now you're late 90s, but this is already big data, unstructured data, all sorts of things that we talk about still today, and how you make sense of all that, how you use machine learning effectively, just a slightly different version of all our talk about AI, to sort through big unstructured data and start to make sense of it, build workflows and things like that. And that was a company that went public in the late 90s. And then it was there that we developed. One of the models of that company was advertising. So and then from there to Context Web, which was an early contextual technology player, ad network, ad exchange, and then one of the earliest creators of real-time bidded programmatic marketplace. That company went through a merger and acquisition, became a company called PulsePoint, which was fairly recently bought by WebMD. And then from there on to Rubicon Project. And so I went there with a number of other people in 2011. And it was the fall after Google had bought AdMeld for $400 million. And Rubicon Project was off in LA saying, well, why didn't that happen to us? And I had a point of view. I told them what they needed to do. And, I think companies, and probably people too, we all get to these moments where sometimes we're not very good listeners. And other times, you get hit and you get knocked down a little bit. And those can be really good moments because you're open to change, and you're open to listening, and you're open to constructive help. And for those of us that are able to provide that type of help in those situations, it's a really great opportunity. And so I originally went in to run the buy side of that company and help the company with its transition from what was then something called yield optimization, something was done with ad networks, to programmatic and real-time bidding. So we had to make some pretty dramatic shifts because this was fall of 2011, and the bet was we could take the company public within a couple of years. And when you do that, you better make sure everything's going up and to the right for a little while with some consistency. Otherwise, that plan's not going to come off very well. And we ended up going public in 2014. And it was just terrific. I mean, the team was terrific, and everything we did, it just had so much energy to it, and purpose, and conviction. And so, and I got to work on incredible things there. Took some leadership roles at IAB when I was at Rubicon, and worked a lot on OpenRTB and some other standards that I think really helped the industry. Got to spend time going around the world, meeting the best customers we had, and talk about best practices and things like that. Worked with our CFO to work with financial analysts, so they really understood our business, not just the numbers, but the actual mechanics of the business and what we were trying to do and how it worked and how we could kind of also have a role as kind of the explainer to these people. So they really actually understood what we were doing in the business and where it was going. And then before I left Rubicon and ended up at MasterCard for a couple of years, worked on some of the early, out of home and television type deals before the automation had really hit them particularly hard. So got to wear a lot of hats at Rubicon, and that was really a blessing. And then a couple years at MasterCard where I ran a data business as it related to the advertising industry.
Wow, that's an incredible track record, and an amazing set of businesses to be involved in. And I can only imagine the lessons that came from all of that. And obviously, what that brings us to is 2018, I believe, when you founded Team Dayā. Can you tell us? I know you've touched on it already, but can you just tell us a bit more about the organization? I think the work it's doing is just incredible. So I just want to make sure we get all of that information, but also, why you founded it in the first place. I'm always fascinated by people's why that drives these things.
Yeah, I love the why. So I was having the same discussion with a lot of people in the business over and over and over again, which went kind of like this. Amazing business. We all talk about it. We all smile. We all have great stories. For the most part, there have been failures, but that's learning. And also most of people's experience has been kind of up and to the right. And anybody who's been in the business for any amount of time has really helped build an entire industry from scratch. I mean, if you go back not too far, digital ads were at zero, and now it's bigger than the television ad market. Who would have thought? And there were a lot of people you looked in the eye early days and they didn't believe you. And so how lucky are we? And surrounded by smart people, because you have a fast growing business like this with a lot of change, a lot of opportunity to attract smart people. But that same conversation said, "Oh, well, there's one thing missing. What's the give back? Like what's the thumbs up mark we're all gonna leave?" And that was just a recurring conversation over and over again. So then there were a lot of discussions about, well, what could we do? And a couple of the feedbacks of a lot of discussions were, I write checks or donations to nonprofits. I'm not sure where it goes. I can't really, I don't know where it goes. And so this idea of bearing witness. So whatever we're going to do, we'll need to raise money, but let's make sure there's some component here where not everybody wants to or can go to Nepal or Senegal or Guatemala, but some people can. And in our instance, they're people that from the industry, and they're bearing witness. So they're actually seeing what it is we're doing. And then the other thing that we kind of fixed on was this idea of let's do something that has the prospect for generational impact. So after a lot of discussion, we said, hey, how about the construction of primary schools in really remote parts of the world that suffer from high rates of poverty, high rates of illiteracy, and using industry speak, you get a high rate of ROI. On that. So for a relatively modest amount of money, so it cost about $40,000 to construct a 2 or 3 room schoolhouse in many of these communities that have nothing, or what they use as a schoolhouse now would not be recognizable to you or me as a schoolhouse. And so that had a lot of appeal. And like anything else that you start, you kind of hang the shingle out, you speak with great conviction, and there's always part of you that says, is this going to work? Are people going to support it? Is this going to get legs? And there were an initial group of us that include Jared Knutson, who's now at TrustX, who's our head of recruiting, and Jordan Mitchell, who was a product lead at Rubicon Project and was at IIB Tech Lab for many years, and Hassan Eric, who runs a media pricing service called Red Mill Solutions out of London, and a bunch of other people. And we said, oh, here we're going to do this, and we're going to raise money, and we're going to plan to build this first school in Nepal. And we hung the shingle out, and gosh, I thought the fundraising was just going to be tough as nails to do, just tough as nails. And we raised the funds for the first school within 8 weeks, and that's when the bells started going off in our collective heads. And we said, well, we might have a pony in here. This might actually work out, and this might be more than one school, and it might be something that we can kind of rinse and repeat. And that's what we've done. So in 2024, we will complete schools 6, 7, and 8. And those schools will be in Nepal, Senegal, and Guatemala. And on from here, we'll have we're working on our 2025 schedule, and it'll be out this summer, and we're expecting 3 more school projects then. And so it's we have this crazy loose band of volunteers. They're all through the ad technology industry. I'd say 80-90% of the people are involved, and they're donors. There are over 1,000 of them. It's a who's who list of CEOs, founders, executives, people who have been in it for the duration. There are some companies that have gotten involved really at the instigation of their CEOs. So people like Jeff Green at the Trade Desk. Jeff's also got his family foundation involved. Eric Mathewson is involved with Wide Orbit, from Wide Orbit. Shiv Gupta, who we talked about at U of Digital. Mike Benedict at Datonics. And Mike has gotten his company behind it. And Mike's actually been on 3 of these school projects himself too, which has been just really, really fantastic too. So there's just been a lot of joy in the whole all these projects.
Yeah, I bet it kind of speaks to the kind of community nature of the ad tech advertising industry, right? That you were able to bring that many people together, as you say, expecting this kind of difficult fundraising process, and then exceeding your expectations so quickly. It really speaks to the people that exist in this industry, which is quite incredible, really.
Yeah, it's nice. I mean, because the model in terms of how we raise funds is really a peer-to-peer model, right? So, you decide, hey, I'm going to go with Team Daya, help raise money for a school build in Guatemala. And one is, there's a lot to like about everything we're doing in general, right? Schools, education, children, economic empowerment, helping communities, helping developing countries. But if it's Ben going to Guatemala, you also have a circle of peers, colleagues, friends, family, and they're going to help you no matter what you're doing, right? So there's just a lot of story in that. And this idea, this point that we developed very early on around bearing witness people get really excited about that. They want to see you with the shovel digging the ditch that becomes the foundation of the school that gets built in that remote community um, in Nepal or Malawi or wherever it is that we're doing the work.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I think you've talked about that kind of building change and giving something back. At a personal level, why was that important to you? Why was that something that you wanted to take on and to get involved in and to actually, to drive forward personally?
It's a little bit of the origin story that we were talking about a minute ago, um, and and I would also say it. I don't think any of us would be doing it if it weren't fun and joyful.
Mm.
And we talk about building change because it's so much bigger than constructing a 2 or 3 room schoolhouse. So I would give the example when we went to Senegal in 2022. The students were using 2 classrooms that were built out of sticks, straw, and cardboard. Dirt floors. So if it gets windy, there's dust everywhere. If it rains, it's wet in there. All sorts of critters climbing up and in the sticks and the straw. This is not a great conducive environment for learning, but it does allow you to understand what's available in some of these instances, and that these communities obviously want this type of outcome. I mean, look how they're kind of running it with the resources that they have. And so, I think when we started, many of us thought about the school as really primary beneficiaries would be the students, but it's so much bigger and wider than that, Ben. It's the families. It's the whole community that you're lifting up, because this structure becomes a center point in the whole community, right? And if you build that kind of support for the kids, then the parents can make better decisions too. Um, and you education is correlated with things like a decline in childhood marriage, right? Stuff like that. The schools that we build, and we haven't talked about kind of the development methodology that's used, because we're only part of the picture. Team Daya is part of the picture, and very intentionally, and this is part of the methodology, is our role needs to be ephemeral. We can be a catalyst, but if you go anywhere close to creating any sort of dependency, that doesn't work. There's no scale in that. So the development model is what we call an all hands in model. So we're coming to the table doing the work of the fundraising and basically being a donor group. But some of the other parties that have to kind of come together for this to happen are the local community. They have to agree that when the school is completed, there are going to be equal access for girls and boys. This is just not always the case in these areas. There are communities that decline the opportunity because they won't agree to something like that. That community has to provide all the unskilled labor. So all the manual labor, it can take 2 to 4 months. All these schools are built with people's hands. There's no machines. We're not running to the home improvement store to rent a piece of machinery. That's not how that works here. the land for the school, if there are local materials that might be used, say like sand, bricks, other kind of inputs like that. They have to provide that. The education and government authorities have got to agree to either new or continuing support, teachers, staffing, materials. And then we have an NGO partner that has staff in all these countries where we operate, and they help implement this methodology. So they do the community selection, and they have access to and do all the project management, the engineering. You need some skilled labor for this. So, you might have bricklayers or roofers or things like that. And so you can see it's all hands on deck, and quite intentionally, because you want all these parties to be involved and to come together in agreement before any of this stuff is kicked off, because what you're trying to do is just assure the best possible outcome and assure that there's real ownership, for the on the communities and the other people that are going to have to support something like this on an ongoing basis.
For sure. I mean, it sounds very much, it's incredibly inspiring, and it really is a generational change you're making to those communities. So it really is incredible work. And before we kind of switch gears a little bit to talk about the advertising industry and the ad tech market as it exists right now, how can people who are listening to this right now, how can they get involved in Team Dayā and support those efforts?
Yeah, there are really 3 or 4 core ways that people can get involved. They can donate funds. You can do that through the website, supportteamdaya.com. Daya is spelled Daya, so it's supportteamdaya.com. So that's easy. $40,000 builds a new school. $1,000 pays to paint an entire school. $500 pays the wage of an in-country mason, one of those skilled laborers you need to construct a school. So that's the first thing people can do, financially support what Team Dayā is doing in building change. The second one is give us a platform to talk about the work, just like you're doing here today, Ben. So the Luma Bank, Terry Kawaja's bank, has had us in any number of times to speak at their conference in New York to raise money. Recently, we were at the Silicon Alley Sports event run by Darren Herman. A number of companies, including Shiv Gupta's company, U of Digital, the Narrative IO guys, have had us say, hey, come in, talk to our employees about what you're doing. The other ways are people can lend their expertise. So part of our crazy merry band is we've surrounded ourselves with advisors for finance, fundraising, marketing, recruiting. So if you think you have something to add there. And then for people that really want to go deep, they can join Team Dayā as a team member. You commit to raising funds, and you plan to go on one of these school builds. And the way that works is we actually go into the community, and we're there for the first week of construction. So literally the first day, we are putting first shovel in the ground. So there'll be kind of spray painted onto the ground. The engineer has laid out where the building's going to go. And, like you might see in the US or Europe, the politicians with the gold shovels. Okay, you got a shovel. It's not gold. And in the US or Europe, the politician hands the shovel back to somebody who does the real work. Well, we take that first shovelful and then we kind of keep going. And we work side by side, and we live in the community for the week. And it's remarkable. You start to see in just a few days this piece of bare ground being transformed, and you start to see pieces of the wall going up. And while we're there for a week, after 2, 3, 4 months, you get a completed 2 or 3 room schoolhouse that, like we talked about before, is going to kind of give a generational, impact to those communities. So it. I would say it's just people say, "Oh, it's great what you're doing. It's such a great thing." It's also incredibly fun, and
Yeah.
it is um, one of the most kind of joyful things you could do. And one of my favorite things, I want to tell 2 more stories before we get into more ad tech stuff. Is one is we ask people to write first person accounts when they come back from doing this. And anybody that's remotely interested or just wants to learn a little bit more, go onto our website and read some of these, because it really not only does it change these communities, I think it changes the executives that go with us to these faraway places and kind of do this joyful thing. Um, and then the other thing the other story I want to tell is in every community when we arrive, there's a ceremony, kind of welcoming us and talking about what's going to happen. And like any other big event, there politicians and other people will come and talk. And but there's also a point where an agreement is signed. So that development model we talked a minute ago, we talked about that, and all those different entities, including the community members uh, and Team Daya members, we all stand on the line and we sign this thing, and it's called the covenant. It's just an agreement. Um, and you'll see people in the community line up, and there'll be some people signing their names, but next to the paper is a stamp pad. And some people go up and they take their thumb and they put it on the stamp pad, and then they put their thumbprint on this piece of paper. And they're doing that because they don't know how to read and write. They're adults that don't know how to read and write. And they live in the community. And the next morning, when you're there with that shovel, uh, digging out the foundation, that person is standing right next to you, digging that same foundation for a school that their child is going to go to. I mean, I've told this story I don't know how many times, and it just always I always get the chills when I tell it. And I said this at we spoke at Terry's Luma conference just recently, and I think what I said was I told this same story, and I said, look, if that doesn't get you out of bed and motivated, I can't help you. I don't know what to do with you, you know. And so it really is. It's true. It's true joy. So.
Yeah, I love that, and I can feel that passion as well. And I think it's an incredible work. And obviously, what we will do is we'll include a link in the description of this podcast if you want to get more information on Team Daya. I really do encourage people to go and check it out, get involved if you can. It really is incredible work. We will now switch gears a little bit and drag you back into the world of ad tech and advertising industry. And obviously, it's amazing to see through Team Daya so many industry leaders coming together to work towards that better future. But as you can look at your experience in the advertising and ad tech industry and what you're doing at Team Daya now, are there any lessons you've taken from the work at Team Daya that could apply back to the ad tech industry today and the challenges we're all facing right now?
I think there's so many parallels. We've run this like a startup. We've been scrappy like a startup. We've begged, borrowed, and steal like a startup. We talk a lot about product market fit, how to be agile, what the go to market is, how to scale the core team, the donors, the platforms, the experts, kind of how do you do that? And so much of that is everything we all learned working in tech. So I think it just, they're just similarities all over the place. And it's just fun to be doing it in this context, so.
Yeah, I bet. And I think it's interesting right now that one of the topics that's really hot right now is privacy, and it's getting more and more airtime, especially in the US market. It's getting more and more attention. What do you feel is necessary for the whole industry to realize that privacy is good for business and to accept that it's a crucial part of a business strategy going forward?
Yeah, well, it is really important, and it's really has to be privacy first. I think that my work experience from being early, kind of in the belly of programmatic, and then eventually inside a Fortune 500 company, MasterCard, which is in many ways is a data company. In fact, when I was there, the then CEO, Ajay Banga, who's now head of the World Bank, he went to a conference in Saudi Arabia. And one of the things that he said at that conference was data is going to be the new oil. And it was a real moment in time because I think many people that you and I know in the ad tech industry may have said that or things very similar to that many, many times. But for the CEO of a payments company and a Fortune 500 company to say that, and to say that line in the Middle East, in Saudi, it kind of hits home. I think one thing that sometimes the industry doesn't think about is we used to spend a lot of time on the whiteboard, explaining the supply chain to people, and people would focus on the middle of it, all the tech companies and how tech talk to each other. And they'd forget about what we would call the edges, meaning the consumer on both sides, the consumer of the advertising, the consumer of the media. And that's a fatal view, I think. If you're not thinking about the edges, so when you're thinking of the supply chain, just keep thinking, who's on the other side of that? Who's on the other side of that? And just go to who is that terminal customer? And you really have to step out of your day-to-day view, because when we're in tech, we're all just talking to each other. It's kind of like staring at your belly button, and it's better if you stand up and look around. And when we talk about supply chain, and this is something that is still getting worked on today. We talk about one of the big topics these days is MFA, made for advertising sites, and what we're going to do about all this and how this gets monitored, and the impact and the funds this takes away from real journalism, and what that means and all the rest of it. Well, if we're talking about the supply chain, we're really talking about the chain of custody, right? So if you talk to people in financial services, you talk about the chain of custody. So in our case, it's advertising. In finance, it's how the dollar goes from one place to another and how it transits and how there's trust in that transit. And so, think about chain of custody. You're a custodian. What's a custodian? It's someone who provides guardianship and protection. And I think that's how we need to think about, privacy, across the ad tech business.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think I've heard you talk about this idea of consumer choice as well. You talk about putting the consumer first.
Yeah.
What, from your perspective, is that kind of ideal future of consumer choice? What does that look like, and how do we get there?
Well, I think it's based around this idea that in the industry, it's not our data. We are simply caretakers, and it's not in 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 when we're sharing things like. Well, one is I think we're starting to move away from identity of the individuals to things like cohorts. This was something that was baked into a lot of the discussions inside Mastercard, that I think ad tech has just got to catch up to and catch up to quickly. But even when it's a cohort, it's like what really does need to be shared to accomplish the objective, and we don't need to share everything. That's not necessary, right? When I go to my auto mechanic, I talk about my car. I don't talk about my personal health. When I go to the doctor, I'm not talking to him or her about my car. They're very selective things. If I need an oil change for my car, I'm not talking about all the other components of my car. So what needs to be shared? How long does it need to be shared for? How can these signals be kind of purpose built, and how can they be ephemeral? So built for the use case and then away. Built for the use case and then away. And I think that that's where we've been headed there for a while, and we got to speed it up. And as far as that being, I think people need to look at that as a business opportunity too, and especially as the market leaders across ad tech. You have more mature businesses. How do you create moats around those businesses? Is you do things that as consumers we really value, right? And so, if Ben builds a really terrific service that respects my privacy, and you also maybe go to the policy people, and there are more sophisticated policies around, and then you have compliance around that and all the rest of it. What are you effectively doing in your business? You're building a moat too. So the notion that this is a hurdle or something that needs to be navigated around or overcome, that's just an error. And so I think it's a win if we again think about the edges, and put privacy first, and then I think ultimately we all win. We'll get even more scale out of our business. And we'll look back in 5, 10, 20 years and say, wow, I can't believe we really had just gotten started back then.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think that's such a great way to look at the industry. And, we talk about it a lot at InfoSum about this idea that privacy is an opportunity, not a hurdle. So completely resonate with what you said there.
Yeah.
Jay, thank you so much for being on the podcast. As you know, this podcast is all about meeting people like yourself who have truly pioneered the way we use data today to deliver better customer experiences. So when you look to people you admire in the industry and within your network, who would you nominate for me to interview in an upcoming episode?
All right, well, I got a good one for you. You're really gonna like this one. One of my favorite characters, Neil Richter. Neil is a 4th generation Montanan from the state of Montana. He's the former CTO and chief scientist at Rubicon Project, chair of the IAB Tech Lab. He's now a principal engineer at Amazon inside their advertising business. And he can explain technology using only ranching, farming, and beer drinking analogies. And Ben, I'm going to challenge you to make that a requirement of Neil if and when you do talk to him. And I also need to say he's been a tremendous supporter of Team Dayā, because he was a co-conspirator at Rubicon Project with both me and Jordan Mitchell. So and he's just a great guy, and you'll have a lot of good laughs and get some insights as well.
I love that. We'll definitely reach out to him, get him on the podcast. I love the idea of setting that challenge. So I'm super excited to reach out to him and speak to him soon. Jay, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Thank you so much for providing such an incredible insight into the industry. Your journey through it has been incredible and inspiring. But more than that, the work you're doing at Team Dayā obviously is incredibly inspiring and important. So I really appreciate you being on here and sharing all of that with us today.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Thanks again to Jay for being on the podcast. What incredible and inspiring work they are doing at Team Dayā to build true generational change. I'd encourage everyone to click the link in the descriptions to learn more. All that's left for me to do is to remind you to hit that subscribe button so you'll know when the next episode of Identity Architects drops. But until then, thanks for listening.